Hello everybody and welcome to the UbiSecure webinar, what is the role of customer IAM in achieving GDPR compliance part 2. This is the part 2 of the series, and the part 1 is actually downloadable through our web pages, and you can find it by navigating to our webpage ubisecure.com and clicking the resources tab, and it's right there in the beginning, along with the GDPR white paper and a survey that we did that also includes GDP related questions. Today, it's the two of us here, Jesse Kurtto, who is the Data Protection Officer of UbiSecure, and me, Petteri Ihalainen. I'm responsible for marketing and mobile services here at UbiSecure, and you may have noticed that the presenter is not Minttu Junikka. She had to go to a customer event today, and I'm replacing her here as a presenter, and also replacing Keith Uber, who is actually absent because of a wonderful family happening. Before we start, let's go through quickly the agenda. You've seen the agenda here in the invite itself. So first we go through where personal data is physically stored and issues related to that. Secondly, we take a look at the compliance for backend applications and microservices using OAuth2 tokens. Third, we look at the on behalf of use cases. And fourthly, question of age is one of the examples that we are going to go through. And last, we talk about data portability. And just a reminder of how you can ask questions. You can ask questions by writing them to the GoToWebinar applications. It should be there. And if you click the questions tab open, you can write down your questions, and we will answer your questions at the end of the webinar. So please feel free to write down any of the questions that may pop into your head when we go through the webinar. And actually, before going into the agenda itself, we talked about GDPR in general here in the office just this week, and what we see here is that GDPR is something that is actually simplifying data models that are used across Europe. It enables service providers to utilize just a simple one data model across all 28 member states. But at the same time, the data model describing the user is getting a bit more complex, and at the same time also getting let's say, higher quality of data. So I hope that this regulation actually allows me to throw away all these, garbage email addresses that I use to register to random online services, because the GDPR is forcing service providers to improve the quality of the data, but also allowing the transparency and trust to grow within the user base. So hopefully this will streamline not just the user experience, but also handling of the personal data. Jesse, do you have anything to add?
I could add here that the GDPR is not that much about adding new data fields. Has the user agree to terms of service? We have that kind of thing before. But what the GDPR adds here is bucket load of metadata. What exactly did the user agree to? Which attributes did he or she agree to be used in which use cases? And like Petteri just said, the GDPR, like all other legislation, carries both a carrot and a stick. And so far the stick, of course, has seen the bigger headlines here. But I would like to underline the carrot part too. Before May this year, if you wanted to comply with the European area legislations, you needed to comply with 28 different legislations Starting from May, you only have to comply with one. So I see this as a great opportunity. Determining where data is physically stored has never been so important than it will be under the GDPR. Of course, we all know the big row between the USA and the EU about privacy, where actually data is stored in various cloud services. But what cloud here actually means is simply somebody else's server. And now it falls to every service provider's duty to know where that server is actually located. And believe me, if you thought that before it was hard to export EU citizens' personal data outside the EU, now it's really going to be painful. And of course, some companies have already seen this as a business opportunity, that hey, we offer hosting here, we guarantee that your data is always stored and transmitted only within the EU. Sure, it costs 5–10% extra, but think of it as an insurance. Okay, the next part is about IoT devices. And when I have to admit myself that when I think of IoT devices, I first think of something useless Chinese junk, and I think, how could this offend my privacy? But then, wait a second, what I'm actually carrying on my wrist here? And wow, it's actually a health provider. It collects health data for me and transmits it to some kind of cloud service somewhere in the cloud. So, okay, currently just my bracelet only tracks my activity, my heartbeat, but what in the future? It might track my blood sugar, blood pressure, transmit all of that to where? And so far, I haven't seen any GDPR compliant software, mobile software for this. They all say that, okay, you need to agree to the terms to use the software and you need the software to use the device, and well, that's it. Then your data is somewhere in the cloud, and I really pray that it's safe. Right. So UbiSecure Identity Server offers OAuth 2 protocol functionalities that work great when building a GDPR compliant service. The auth in OAuth stands for authorization, you know, and authorization is exactly what is required before processing a data subject's personal information. The UbiSecure Identity Server can work in many roles, such as an authorization server, a resource server, and even a client. The first one, an authorization server, it is basically issuing and managing access tokens, providing revocation services, and performing all necessary signing, encryption, and validation in order to ensure secure information exchange. The user info endpoint works as a resource server, and it can be configured to return both real-time user attributes and user consent status. And when a user identity is federated from a third-party service, such as a social network or another trading partner, the UbiSecure Identity Server works in the client role, requesting and verifying both user attributes and consent collected by third parties. For example, it can operate as an OpenID Connect client, using appropriate flows specifically designed for federated identity and access control. And using access tokens granted by the authorization server, a microservice can check the real-time status of any user attributes, including consents for different use purposes of these attributes. And here we should keep in mind that under the GDPR, every specific usage purpose for every attribute requires consent. Refresh tokens, they allow backend services to operate on behalf of the users within the user's context, even when the user is no longer present. And the UbiSecure Identity Broker Engine allows these rules to be configured in the user interface of the SSO management console. And especially under the GDPR, it is a solid decision to minimize the amount of personal data collected. And this data minimization principle is an important part of security and privacy by design, as required by the GDPR. And for example, a microservice gets only the minimum information required for the task at hand. It is even possible to configure transmission of the consent status itself without any unnecessarily retransmission of a user's personal data. So you won't run into a chicken and egg problem here. And the ID token itself can be passed between trusted components, and it is validated by the signature without any additional server calls. And this speeds up processing time dramatically for applicable use cases. And finally, ERF2 can be applied to companies' own services or used to allow secure access to the same functionality across organization boundaries. Both the transport layer and the message layer can and should be encrypted. And the best thing about utilizing industry standards is that now all of this is done in a standards compliant manner using industry best practices. And you know what? This is exactly what an auditor will want to hear if they come knocking to your door.
So we've been mentioning the Identity Broker Engine here and there, and saying that it's one of the parts responsible for taking care of the minimized identity data that gets sent out. And I thought it would be prudent to just to give a few words what the Identity Broker Engine actually is. It's a collection of features and functions within the UbiSecure Identity Platform or server, and it takes in data from various different sources, like inbound federations, people coming from other domains to your domain, or from third-party authentication methods like social logins, bank IDs, mobile operator IDs, government EIDs, and so on and so forth. And combining this information that is located also within your own infrastructure, in your LDAPs or SQLs. And thirdly, utilizing the data that is within the identity management part of the identity server itself, where authorization data, for example, is located. That's the authorization that you can see in the picture on the left, where the manager has authorized an employee or employees to perform a certain type of functions within a certain application using a specific role. So the Identity Broker Engine is responsible for creating these unique identity profiles per each application. So if you imagine that you are a multinational corporation or large corporations with several different business lines, you have different kind of applications, and these applications do have different kind of needs for identity data. It's not prudent and not advisable, according to the privacy by design principles, to send out a bulk of identity data without any kind of regard of, let's say, controlling or how the identity data is presented to the application, meaning that if you send everything out to every application, that's not right. So the Identity Broker Engine takes care of this profile creation and gives the minimum viable identity data to each and every application. And this is all, of course, all transparent to the end user. They hop from one application to another in a single sign-on fashion, and the Identity Broker Engine and the UbiSecure Identity Server takes care of the data policies so that this privacy by design principle is followed. And the same principle also applies to identity data that gets sent out from your domain to another domain if your end user decides to leave your domain for another one.
Now, I briefly mentioned earlier the refresh tokens, and they are a really nice mechanism included within the OAuth protocol that enable acting on behalf of the user, even when the user is no longer present. And the two general categories of acting on behalf of is acting on behalf of another person or a service acting on behalf of the user. And the first case, person to person, is very basic use case of our UbiSecure identity platform, especially its customer ID component. It's very easy to authorize someone else to act on your behalf. And also it's very just as easy to revoke that authorization. The other one, service to service, we put an example here, the PS2 directive, for example, a finance proxy service requesting account information from a payment service provider. And another bit media sexy one is different trading platforms where you can actually automate the trading platform to do trades on behalf of you. And then you can sit back, enjoy a binge of Game of Thrones and watch the virtual currencies flow in or out of your wallet.
And this kind of on behalf functionality is actually something that we're probably going to see a lot more in the future, especially if you look at the last bullet points. I mean, I would imagine that end users would like services where they can instruct a particular service to perform a certain kind of function or get a desired result, and then just allow the service to complete all the transactions that are related to this kind of result that the end user is looking for. And the OAuth 2 use case allows that quite nicely, and hopefully, at least as I am quite a lazy person, I would like to see these kind of services to come up more in the future. So the next one is a question of age. On the surface, it may look fairly simple. Either you are of age or you're not. In a sense, it seems binary, but the number of use cases out there is tremendous. First of all, there's gambling. That's kind of obvious. But then there are other use cases for the age itself. For example, 10 years ago, when I was presenting one of our solutions in a European best practice seminar, a Belgian representative explained how they were combating a problem within their country that was at that time quite prevalent in the news, and that was related to pedophilia. So they had these chat forums where older men were actually doing something that they shouldn't have. And what they did is, at that time, sounded really nice and innovative, is that they used their Belgium EID cards to verify the age of the people that were in these chat rooms. So if you were above 18, you didn't have any business attending any conversation or writing any kind of things at this chat room. Then again, another example would be elderly people who have, for example, here in Finland at least, quite nice reductions on kind of like sports services and these kind of things. If they want to renew their, let's say, card that gets them past a gate at a swimming hall, if they could do it online, they need to prove that they are above 65 years old. Within the GDPR context, this is an example where we anonymize the data. This is just one example. There can be many where you should transform something that you already store within your system, which is the date of birth. But the application does not need to know the date of birth. It does need to know if the person is above 18 or fits into a age bracket or something, and the identity provider or UbiSecure identity server is responsible for making this kind of attribute and attaching that to the identity profile that gets sent to the application. So the application can simply say, is this guy above 35? And the identity provider or user identity server just simply says yes. Or in some cases, it can also provide the exact age, but I can't see many use cases for that. But the idea is that data should be as anonymous as possible, as long as it feels the need for the end user and the application. We have one real live example as well. Here in Scandinavia, a cruise line called Viking Line operates and transports thousands of passengers between Finland and Estonia, Finland and Sweden, and so on. And as very well all the Scandinavian people know that the alcohol prices here in Scandinavia are very high. What Viking Line has done is that they have created a pre-order shop for anyone traveling on their cruise ships or ferries. And when you book a trip, you get a reservation code, and you can go to the online shop, pre-order and purchase copious amounts of alcohol. Because usually when you do these things, you're not just buying a couple of six-packs, you are buying pellets of beer, cider, wine, and these kind of things. And they take care of everything and even deliver those purchases to your car. But the age verification is a very important step in this process. So before you pay online, you have to verify your age. And Viking Line is using our Identity Cloud service to accomplish this task by allowing the passenger to authenticate by using a bank ID. And bank ID here is associated with the social security number, which includes the date of birth.
Now, data portability, or right to export your own data to another service. And this presents an interesting chicken and egg problem here. Let's say it's June, GDPR is into effect, and you're a service provider. And then one day you will get an email saying that, hey, my name is Jesse Kurtto, and I want a data dump of everything you have on me. Now the first question is, how do you know it's really me asking for the information? And interestingly, the GDPR doesn't say anything about authenticating the data subject, which means the end user. But of course, we can see here that weak authentication is not really recommended in this case. And there are two ways to do it then. Either try the British way, ask me to send copies of my driver's licenses, heating bills, electricity bills, whatever, or use a more modern method, Mobile Connect, Tupas, whatever.
Or Swedish bank ID.
Of course.
Danish bank ID. Usually the countries, European countries have a strong identity available to the citizens.
Yeah, we are blessed here. And the other issue, of course, is that when you have verified that, okay, this user really has a right to export for all this data, in which format it should be delivered. And again, unfortunately, the GDPR doesn't give any examples. It does mention that the data should be machine readable, but it also implies that it should be human readable as well. And how else could I, as the data subject, verify the contents of the data dump if I can't read a single word of it? And even though I predict that unlike in the PSD2, the right for data export is a bit of a niche case in the GDPR, it really needs to scale too in the end. And if you have to do everything manually, assign people to collect bits and pieces of data around from 10 dozen systems spread around the globe, then convert all to both machine and human readable data and have somebody mail them to me, I'm sorry, this is like a real life denial of service attack against your company. So whenever you need to involve the administrators to SSH into remote systems to collect bits and pieces of data, then something is wrong in the process. And of course, using a centralized identity and access management platform is worth more than its weight in gold here.
So I'll talk a little bit about one of our customers called S Group. It's a co-op based here in Finland and operates in the Baltic countries, and they have quite extensive e-services for their customers. So the e-services and the identity is basically tied to their loyalty card. And if you have this loyalty card, it's possible for you, for example, to forego the paper-based receipts at the grocery store altogether. So every time you buy something from S Group and you show your loyalty card, the receipt of your purchases will go to the e-services of S Group. And what they have done is that this is all unfortunately in Finnish, so only the Finnish listeners will actually understand this, but it lists in the green tabs, it lists the months of the year, and for each month you can review individual purchases, or if you want to, for example, transport your data out of the S Group, this is one place where you can download all your purchase history in a single PDF document. And they have made it extremely simple for the end users or customers to transport their data. And one thing to note about the data transport or portability is that it doesn't automate or automatically mean the same thing that account erasure. People can download and port their data anytime they want, but the account still remains until the end user or the customer says that please remove or erase my data or account. So please don't build any kind of automation to erase the account when someone downloads all their data away from your service. And that basically concludes our webinar. Like I said in the beginning, there's the Compliance Starter Pack in the on the web pages. It's under the Resources tab, and the Part 1 series is there so that you can watch it again or share with your colleagues. We will also be adding this webinar as a recording to the Compliance Pack. So again, this is shareable within your organization. And there's also the GDPR and Customer IAM white paper that you can download and share with your colleagues. Okay, I think this concludes the webinar. Thank you all for participating, and just remember to check upon our web pages once in a while and follow us on the social media. You'll get all the latest news through that. So thank you for attending, and have a very, very nice rest of the week.
Thank you and goodbye.